case, you have a shell around it, right? You have a shell that sort of creates all of the objectives itself, right? It's self-directing. You see what I mean? Like the society in this case is constantly working to improve itself on purpose.
Demonstrate the way that it's improved itself. That'd be very interesting.
No. We'll have to, very soon actually use the software, and then we will see, how we go from. But the idea really is to constantly have research, as part of it. So I'm building a company on one hand, and a research laboratory on the other hand, right? So that is all geared toward understanding collective wisdom better over time, right? And improve it, so be self-improving. And so the interesting thing about OpenCog is that it has already a lot of that characteristic of metacognition, right? So sort of like, how do we learn faster to get better, and how do we measure what it means to be better, right? And so then that is a whole debate on itself, and that is that's all part of it, in essence, getting better measurements, not stopping, like we do in society. We stop, right? We find a measurement that somebody likes, GDP, and then we stick with it for 50 years, right? So we don't actually improve ourselves. We don't try to improve ourselves. Democracy isn't built with self-improvement as part of it, right? In fact, it's really to me, it's incredible that we come out with another iPhone, every 6 months, but we haven't innovated in a really major way on democracy in maybe 200 years, and I think that democracy is more important than this. So that's really, in some ways, what it is. It's what we're trying to do is innovate on markets and democracy, and sort of really take the benefits from one and the other, and learn really how to fine-tune the sort of democratic market, if you will, to enable completely hierarchy-free collective decision making. So imagine the mayor of San Francisco said, "Okay, I want to run on the platform to only use collectivize, and actually make my job redundant over the next 4 years, right?" And suppose that happens, right? And then they could say, "Oh, well, now we do this in California, right?" And then eventually, you don't actually you have systems that are competing against the current system. Could be cities, it could start slowly, and they're competing in a way, in a sort of marketplace of ideas, right? And also how well they do in various measures and so on. And so if you have some of them starting to be self-deciding without politicians and without, sort of bosses in companies as well, and if they do well, right, then that's part of the marketplace, right? So of ideas, and you can just sort of underhandedly, you don't need a revolution to change the world. That's what I'm saying. It's like what you need is to sort of figure out ways to improve certain things and demonstrate that, right? And I think that's what I'm trying to do. That's what we're trying to do.
The ancient Switzerland, where they seem to have a referendum for everything.
Oh yeah. Okay, yes. But that's costly, because then you have to all go to the same place and raise your hands and right. Yeah, exactly. So it takes time, right? It takes effort. You have to take a day off or something. With a software like that is just embedded in everyday life, that does more than Facebook, right? It does more in the sense that you can show people what you ate last night or something like that. Here, what you're trying to do is really show people what you believe is true and challenge them and mutually challenge yourselves. Is that really true? Does the world really work that way, or is that just how you see it? And then ultimately you can prove to each other that maybe you're right about certain parts, and other parts the other person is more often right, and you start learning that. So you can socially, you add that social element to it, which prediction markets don't, by the way. So they're not a social network, right? They're not. You can't see what other people bet on, what other people think. In a prediction market, you're sort of buying some shares of some bet, and then they increase in value, and you're selling some other things, right? But you're selling it to some anonymous market. So what we're doing is really we're bringing this synergetic aspect of a social network to a prediction market, and we're enriching that concept as well.
Aren't there also dangers?
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, I'm thinking slightly Brexit-wise here at the moment. Come from various other populist states.
Right. Of course, in the course of my PhD, a lot of things happened that made me think a lot about how certain current systems don't serve the people, really, and that sort of that definitely influenced my thinking, along the way. There was, I guess I started thinking about collective intelligence as one of the more important aspects of sustainable development sometime around 2014. That's when I sort of thought, okay, climate change, yes, that's a problem. It's a human-made problem, right? We all agree on that, right? So we created it. So therefore, it's a failure of collective intelligence, right? And so you can go down the line, you pick at any problem, Brexit, Trump, anything, that you could think of that we are facing as a problem right now is really, most of it is self-inflicted. And so that means that we're failing in being collectively intelligent, right? So we have to solve that problem. I think that problem solves all the other problems. That's how I see that. Yeah.
Hi, and so it seems to me with your idea of averaging wisdom of crowds and that kind of thing, but there are some problems that aren't totally amenable to that. And I think you've highlighted one.
Yes.
It's like the Monty Hall problem.
Yes, for example. No, the Monty Hall problem can be solved.
It's absolutely useless if you ask people. The Ask Marilyn column that posed this problem. Tens of thousands of replies, some from tenured mathematicians who got the answer wrong, and the vast majority of the replies got it wrong.
Yeah, but
so that's the kind of class of problem.
That's true.
That I want someone that knows Bayes' theorem to answer that problem. Similar to brain surgery, I'd like a brain surgeon to do that problem.
Right. It seems that way, but once you start getting people to bet on things that are quite similar to the Monty Hall problem, and you give them a little bit of time to see how the prices adjust and so on, then that becomes a very different thing.
Is that
so collectively
accuse themselves from making a decision?
Well, they have some more time to think about it, for one thing, and the other thing is they see how other people think about it. They also see the price change, right? So some brilliant guy is going to say, oh my God, these people are wrong, right? They don't understand the Monty Hall problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to buy lots and lots and lots of bets on the second door, right? And then that price will increase because one person gets it. And they bet like crazy on that particular problem. And they change the price. So sometimes it only takes one brilliant person to figure out why everybody is wrong. And that they can make a lot of money on other people being wrong here. And then the collective as a whole figures it out. Because the prices actually are the collective, right? The collective belief is the price of the bet.
I think empirically these people didn't change their minds even on the way to them.
Yeah. But if you put them in, they may not. They may bet against me, and I might bet against them and take their money, and I'll just keep buying shares until the price is correct, until it has 2/3 probability. In fact,
people replying to a newspaper don't have any skin in the game, right? So there's no.
Yes,
so
that's the other thing.
Skin in the game, the whole
Right.
will change.
Right, that's also true. Right, so once you start.
What happens if there is more than one optimum? I mean, there's more than one optimum solution, but one of them is a global solution. But this is a system of social conformism points to a local one.
Well, there shouldn't
We'll stay there, right?
Well, no, the incentives are anti-social conformity, right? Social conformity will get you killed in this game.
No, I think he's asking about if
Right.
there's a local minimum and a global minimum.
Oh, I see. Yeah, it could happen. It could probably happen. Yeah.
I mean, are you claiming that this is a complex problem, or is it not a mix?
It's hard to say. This often tends to be a rather complex problem, right? And it even may not be well posed in these terms because there often are solutions that no one's ever thought about. They're not part of the space, right? So there's not like an unchanging space. So when you think of like convex problems or concave problems or any of those things, right? You're assuming that you have a few fixed variables that are in some, in some sort of equilibrium state or something like that, right? But this is not like that, right? It's like the Donald Trump election never happened before. The earthquake in Ireland hasn't happened in over 50 years, right? Now, if you want to estimate the costs of this particular hurricane, right? Does it make sense to think of this in terms of, global or local optima? I have a feeling that those terms don't quite apply to these kinds of problems. But I can't, prove it, or I can't, it's, what is the right prediction of a hurricane in Ireland? Now, once you observe that hurricane, and let's say people predicted it with like 3% probability that it would happen, you would say they probably were wrong. They weren't doing it right. There was something wrong about that guess.
You do need the repetition to train the system.
No. So this is another thing that's really interesting about collective intelligence, is that unlike precedented events that already happened once like that, you're sort of looking at fixed problems like coin flips or something like that, right? You can't really use a machine learning